Let's start. So first, again and again and again, let's thank all the sponsors who make this event possible. Okay, we really need them. Thank you for having me. So the title of this session is Advanced Business Process Management with Power Automate and Dr. Flow. It's an advanced session. I'm Dr. Flow. I'm also known as Serge Luca. I'm a business application VP based in Brussels. I've been MVP for 15 years. I was MVP in SharePoint, well, .NET, SharePoint, Office 365, and 4 years ago, I became MVP in business application. I'm the creator of an open source tool called the Power Platform BPM Toolkit, which is on GitHub, and I will talk about that during the session. It's free. I'm also the author of the Power Automate in a Day course that I create for Microsoft. I also work for a company that I create called the Power Platform Associate with another MVP, Isabel van Kempenhout, who did present a session this morning in the Power BI track. So she specializes in Power BI. So this is the content of the session. Quick introduction, architecture, limitation of the tool, some good practices, patterns, and conclusion. Quick introduction. So in this session, which is an advanced session, I focus on enterprise application. So it's not the quick and dirty citizen development application, right? So it's a really enterprise application with a Power Platform. All the concepts I'm going to talk here have been fully tested since 2016. Okay, so very early in the Power Platform. Of course, some concepts can be applied to citizen developers, but not all of them. So first concept, which is very important, always keep it simple, but sometimes you need to put some complexity. And the practice that we have learned from the industry are still applied in the Power Platform. That means you will have, if your application becomes very important, you will have to organize your application in different layers, and you have a data access layer to access the data, business layer, and to be fully honest, usually in my application, the business layer and the data access layer are grouped together. I will give you more details about this. And then you have the presentation layer, where you put your UI, your UX. So typically in the presentation layer, you have Power Apps, you have Teams, you have SharePoint Forms, Microsoft Forms, you have bots. In the business layer, you have child flows, and same for data access layers. But again, I usually merge business layer and data access layer. And of course, you have data source, plenty of data source because we have many connectors in the Power Platform, right? SharePoint, Dataverse, Oracle, you name it. And in many cases, we have a new layer that I call the analytics layer. That's where we put the reporting parts, Power BI typically. And that means that, yeah, also I forgot to mention this. We have a logging layer because in many cases, you need to keep a trace of how your application behave. Okay, so I have some specific code to log my application behavior. I can log that in Dataverse, in SharePoint, or to Azure Application Insight. In some cases also you need to have some security specific behavior. Okay, not anyone can see everything. So sometimes you need to apply unique permission. So that's why I have a security layer, okay, where I apply role-based access control, or I can classify the data as well. And in many applications, at some point, the data need to be archived. So there is a retention policy that you need to apply. So I have an archiving layer as well. I usually create child flow for that. So basically, UI presentation layer, call the business layer, call the data access layer, talk to the backend, talk to the data source layer, and information flow backs. Okay, you can directly read information from the data source to the presentation layer. For reading, it's fine, you can directly do that, but writing, it's usually better to go through the layers business and data access layer to provide some validation, server-side validation. Okay, of course, analytics can directly connect to the data source layer. Okay, the benefit of having layers is that it provides code reusability. So you can centralize code, so you can use some code across one or several applications. Okay, so move more code into child flows so that you can reuse that across a huge panel of application. It's easier to unit test if you need to unit test your code. It's easy to work in team because you have different layers, so different people can work at the same time on different flows, for instance, right, on the backend. It's easier to debug as well, so you don't have to debug the UI, you can debug the backend. So the backend are flows. It's easy to maintain. You need to know the limitation of the platform, and the limitations are there since the early beginning. Flow duration is 30 days. So after 30 days, your flow stops. So if you have business process that take more than 30 days to complete, you need to use something else. You can use another tool like Nintex or whatever. And what I did is I did create an open source framework, 100% written with the Power Platform, that I've called the BPM Toolkit, which is on GitHub. Okay, so that's what I do if I have to go beyond 30 days. Also, there's no state machine in Power Automate. So state machine means that you can have a business logic like this with several steps, and at some point you need to get backward. That's the benefit of state machine. We cannot do that in Power Automate. So typically in Power Automate, you can do this. You have a flow. You say, hey, I'm going to ask for approval, level 1, approval level 2, approval level 3. This is easy in Power Automate. But problem is, if you have to check the status, if level 1 approval is okay, then you go to level 2. Level 2 approval is fine, it's approved, you go to level 3. The question is, what if one of the approval is rejected? How can you get back? You cannot get back. Okay. So that's basically why we need state machine in Power Automate. So if I'm facing this situation, then I rely on the BPM Toolkit because I like the Power Platform. It's based on the Power Platform, right? So also application lifecycle management. So DevOps is quite weak in the Power Platform. Okay, so the DevOps tool in the Power Platform are not mature enough. When a flow stops, you cannot restart the flow from where it's up. Okay, so you can do that with the BPM tool. You need to be aware of the API call limitation. So your code can be throttled. So depending on the type of license. So you have to be fully aware of the throttling limits. These have been changed recently. So for instance, if you have an Office 365 license, I think it's 4,000 calls per user per day. Okay, so this was the whole limitation. But you can buy capacity add-ons to be able to call more APIs. So anytime you call a variable, you call you put something in the database, it's one call, right? So there is a limitation. So you have to be fully aware of that. That's important. I will skip this one. There's no task delegation. Task delegation means that if you ask someone to approve something, for instance, and if this person is not there, then the business process will wait. And you can have some bottleneck in your business process. Okay, so people must be able to delegate their task to someone else. So you cannot do that in the Power Platform. That's why I put that in the BPM Toolkit. Also, approvals in the Power Platform are linked to environment. So you might have several applications. You might have to approve to get approval from several applications. If these applications are in different environment, you have to switch to different environment to get your approval. So what we want is to have one place where we have all the approvals. So that's what I've done in the BPM Toolkit. Also, an issue is that end user don't see the workflow. They don't see where you are in the business process. Okay, so that's, I mean, they expect that, right? So, and that's what I put in the BPM Toolkit again. End user, people who start a workflow should be able to stop the workflow. We cannot do that. The business should be able to create workflows. Okay, so if you have a complex workflow, the business cannot really change the workflow. So I've put that in the BPM Toolkit. So the BPM Toolkit is free. I don't get any money on this, right? So it's on GitHub. It's very complex. It's a very complex application that you can use for free. Don't use it right now because I'm gonna upload a new version in the coming weeks. So I'm working on the new deployment process. So you can get a setup guide, you can get a developer guide on GitHub. You will see how to deploy or to use it. It's 100% written with the Power Platform. I've learned a lot of best practice by writing this BPM toolkit. So the modules of this toolkit are the following. At the moment, it's based on SharePoint. It's so the backend is fully based on Power Automate. Code is provided. The modules are the following. So we have core modules with security modules, case launcher, workflow generator, task delegation, task manager. We have archiving module, analytics module. We have a workflow runtime that provides state machine. It's fully written with the Power Platform. And on top of that, we have UI code. Okay, task form, process dashboard. I will give you some screenshots, you will see. Okay, so let's talk about good practices. First, always use a service account for your application. Okay, it is the maker account, right? So, and it's ideally an Office 365 account with a mailbox, because usually your code running in the background should be able to send email. Okay, it's not easy to ask for that to IT, but you will get it. It should be a premium account. Why premium account? Because premium account give you more API call. Okay, so even though you use premium account, does not mean that end user need premium account, but your application will get less throttling. And also some premium feature can be used with this service account without having to give premium license to any end users. Okay, so if you will see, I will give you more specific details about this. This service account can also be multi-factor authentication. So even though you might get password update, they won't interrupt your flows. Okay, because Power Automate is what we call a confidential client. So there's no issue even though you change the password. Document your flow. So when I create a flow, I put a nice description in this flow, you see, so don't forget, that's very important. Also, when you name your action in the flow, keep the default action name followed by space. Okay, so example, get item, keep it, and then space, hyphen, and then specify, for instance, the list, okay, plus, so the data source, plus additional detail. So get item, case status open, for instance, so that you know which action it is. If you rename this, then you don't know which action it was, right? Use scope everywhere. Okay, so all your code should be hidden in scope, so that when you read the code, you should be able to have a high level understanding of what your code does. That's important, you see. So in scope, you can put action. Also, if you want to provide code reusability, you need to use child flows. Okay, child flow can be called by flows or by Power Apps. Also, child flows are very important. So, but if you want to use child flows, make sure that in your DLP policy, the HTTP connector is not blocked, because we need that. We need the HTTP connector when we use child flow. Okay, so I see many people blocking HTTP connector in the DLP policy. Don't do that. You can also, as an alternative, create share or custom connectors, but that means that your end user will need a premium license, which is not necessary with child flow. So I usually prefer child flows than custom connectors. It's good practice to test your code with guest account. Okay, why is that interesting? Because external user might use your application, but also testers can be in another tenant. So you can have a tenant for dev, but a tester can be in the production tenant. So they might have to use their production account to test your application. So your application must be guest aware. Okay, so normally everything works. That's my experience, except this. So this does not work because that guest is not supposed to get information about the user in the company, right? So guest cannot use this one. Otherwise, it should work. Fully master, yeah, it's a you here. Fully master the licensing documentation. It's very confusing, right? Read this documentation. I call that the monster because it's really ridiculously weird. But you need to know that, for instance, you can use an HTTP action. So you can make your flow a web service. But end user do not need a premium license to use HTTP action. So this is mentioned in the documentation here. So that is important. First, elevation of privilege. What is that? Let's say we have Alex. Alex run a Power Apps application. The Power Apps application called a flow. The flow has been installed by the Flow Maker account. Okay. And this flow access SharePoint. So the question is, who access SharePoint? The answer is Alex. So it's not FlowMaker account, it's Alex. Okay, that's by default. And to have elevation of privilege, that means flow one here should call another flow installed with the FlowMaker account. And that means that Alex won't talk to SharePoint, but the FlowMaker account will talk to SharePoint. You have elevation of privilege. That's important. Okay, I usually call, so this is Power Apps. Power Apps call the first flow, and the first flow call the second flow. I usually call this flow proxy flow. So even in the name of the flow, you have proxy, and these are the child flows. So in the BPM toolkit, I have almost 100 flows. Many are proxy, and of course, I have child flows. Advice: if you use this pattern, there's no traceability because your flow run with the maker account. So you don't know who is the caller. So you need to keep a trace of who called your flow. So my recommendation is to pass the current user to the child flow. So typically your Power Apps flow, which is called by Power Apps, will have a parameter. I call that actor, which will keep the email address of the end user. And you can pass that to the child flow. And the child flow will store that in the audit log of your application, okay? So that you have a trace of who did what. Otherwise, you lose compliancy, and that's an issue. Question: if you have this pattern, flow one call flow two, who's going to call flow two APIs? Alex or someone else? So the answer is today is the maker, but next year it's going to be Alex. So normally in a few months, Alex will pay for the API calls in flow 2. Second pattern, I call that the secure record pattern. What is that? If you have unique permission, you want to apply unique permission to records. What I do is I create a blank record in the backend. I secure the record and then I put information in the record. So put information only when it's secured. So typically, you see here, I create the blank record in SharePoint, for instance. I secure that. And then I put information in the record. Okay, so that's a good pattern. Other pattern, generic way to submit information. Let's say you have a big application, Power Apps application, and you want to have a generic layer, Power Automate layer, that can be used across many applications to store information. So what I do is this. So typically you have, these are different forms, okay, different application. And of course, information is stored in different table. But you want one layer for storing the information in the backend. So in Power Apps, you can create a global variable, which is actually a record with your value here. And you can submit that by calling a flow. You see, you call a flow here, and you pass JSON of this global variable in there, and this information will be passed to the flow called by Power Apps here, and this flow called a backend flow. So this is a proxy that will call the backend flow. So in the backend flow, you can parse your JSON and put information in the data source. And so that for in each column name will have to be the same name as the field name in the JSON. And that works. Very generic. Yeah, I will share the PowerPoint document, yes. So pattern 4, managing errors, try, catch, finally. It's an old pattern. So in your application, in every flows, you can take a look at the BPM toolkit. You always have the try, catch, finally. Typically, in the try, I put my code, my dangerous code, and then I have a scope catch that will be called if there is an issue in the try. Okay, so you can do that. So in the catch scope, configure run after the try. So I always use the same name, try, catch finally. So this will run is try, is fail, skip, or is timeout, right? Catch run in any case. And the code, I call a central flow that will handle the errors. So here I pass some information about the error. You see, I will detail this. This is this string result, which is an interesting function that you'll find in documentation. The name of the scope. This will return an array with all the action in the flow and their status, failed or error, failed or succeed. Okay, here I pass the workflow. And in the business process, you need to pass the business case. Okay, pass business case. That's business case is always present in every flow. So typically, I filter the array to check the action with the failed status, and I store that in a central place. So here it's a SharePoint list. See, so I can always retrieve the fail flow because in my application, so this is an example of the BPM toolkit. I always have a monitoring application. You can find it in the BPM toolkit. Is this one, and when you click there, you can see all the flow that failed. So if you click here, this is one failed flow. You click. So first, in this application, I check if all the flows are up and running. So every 30 minutes, I check if all the flows of an application are up and running. Otherwise, I get a danger message. But then here, if I have something that failed, you click and you can get to the failed flow. Okay. Next pattern, don't log the app UI during long process. What is that? Let's say you have a Power Apps application. You submit the Power Apps application. When you submit, you will ask someone to approve something. Then you might be tempted to do this. So in the backend flow called by Power Apps, you have Power Apps trigger, start and wait for approval, and then respond. This is not good because, of course, approval can take weeks, right? So don't do this because otherwise your UI will be stuck. Do this. Power Apps response, and here you can still put the code. So this will return an HTTP status to your application. So your application will be free, but the approval will still run. So the workflow will still be running in the background. You see, so this is a very nice pattern that I apply everywhere. Also, think business process, not flow, even though behind you create flows. So this is an example of business process. A leave request for an employee in Paris. It will be validated by doctor, by legal department, by line manager, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so this can be implemented by several flows, but it's one business process. Business process, right? There is one case ID. And if you use a BPF toolkit, you can follow the business process. You can see it's here. It's waiting for this group of people to act. This was approved, it's green. this was skipped because you can also skip step in the business process. In BPM Toolkit, you can go back, you can skip, you can redirect, you can reassign. So it's a fully state machine, 100% written with the Power Platform. You can see the case ID here. Okay, so think in terms of business process. And in the BPM Toolkit, I've implemented what I call the case management pattern. I've applied this pattern in many applications. What is it? This is the scope of the BPM Toolkit. And outside, people can make their own custom request. Could be HR request, could be whatever you want. For each request, there will be one list or one Dataverse table. Okay, it's not in the scope of the BPM Toolkit, so you put information in there. But then in the BPM Toolkit, we have a list called case. So putting that here will trigger a case. This is very generic. And for each case, we'll get life cycle. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So the system will analyze the flow definition and will generate steps somewhere. See, new case, new request will become a case. Steps will be generated. I call that the case management pattern. I've applied that to many, many projects, not just BPM Toolkit. It was so successful that I've put that in my favorite baby, BPM Toolkit. But are we still on time? We check what time is it? Yes. As conclusion, what we can say is this. Keep it simple. Always keep it simple, but apply the good practice defined by the industry. Using child flows in your application is very, very, very important. I prefer child flow to custom connectors. You can create mission critical application with Power Automate. Okay. Sometimes you need to put a layer on top of that, but still you can. In most cases, using Dataverse with Power Automate is a very great and robust option. Even Dataverse for Team is very interesting. It's robust. Always think in terms of business process, not just flow, but business process. So that's very important. I think we still have some time, right? Clifton, do we still have some time? I think yes. So let me just quickly illustrate what you will get when you use a BPM Toolkit. Let me illustrate that. So when you submit a request, the request is analyzed by the BPM Toolkit, and you can follow the different business process here, you see. So you can see the different business process. So this one is waiting here, this one is waiting there, this one has been approved, etc. You can, when you click here in the business process, of course, you need to have the permission to do that. You can manage the business process. Okay, so for instance, this is for HR department, and you can say, hey, I'm going to manage this. So I'm taking ownership of this business process, which is waiting for this guy to react. I'm taking ownership of this. Okay, and I can say, hey, this guy is supposed to approve something. And indeed, we have an approval center. I'm not using the out-of-the-box approval from Power Automate, but we have an approval center. Actually, I did open it here. It's here. You see, so this is the approval center, and you see all the requests that need to be approved by this person are here. So I can approve or reject or whatever. I can also check the business process that I did send. So my request, you see, this is the workflow that I did submit, so I can follow. It's waiting here. You see, end user can follow their business process. So this is the view of end users, and this is the view of HR. You see, so people who manage the business process, so they can take ownership. You can have another overview of the business process. You see? You can even, if you are HR manager, you can even approve in batch, for instance. You can, yeah, I don't have any. Yeah, I don't have it waiting here, but if I'm a HR manager, I can say, I take this and this and this and this, and I say it's okay for me. You can create your own custom action. For instance, here, you see the workflow is pretty complex. And one of the action is to generate a document. It generates a document in PDF that will be stored in the HR part of the employee, you see, based on template. And the way we define the workflow is in the SharePoint list. So you can create what I call the meta workflow. Meta workflow. Where is it? Meta workflow. Yeah, here, meta workflows. You can create your own workflow. You see, step 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You specify who is supposed to do something. People can have different action. It could be feedback, it could be approve, it could be reject, could be stop, could be you can specify that you want to make go to. So if this people here say no, then the system will go to another step. So we have state machine, we have go to. We can go forward, we can go backward, you see. So basically the business define its workflow in a SharePoint list, and the BPM toolkit will generate steps for you. And that's the step that you can see in here. And of course, we can stop workflows. Take one workflow. And as HR, I can say, I want to stop this one, the whole business process. So it's being stopped, and all the people in the pipeline will be notified that their approval has been stopped, you see, and you will see now it's black. The whole business process is stopped, you see. So this is something that you cannot do with Power Automate, right? So by creating this BPM toolkit, I've learned a lot of things about good practices. So you can find the BPM toolkit here. I will share the slide, of course, but don't take this version now because a new version is coming. And this version has a lot of new features. As I mentioned, there is for instance, tons of features, like including an archiving modules. So you can automatically archive your request, your workflows, you see, forever. There's no limitation in time. Okay, you can archive, you can specify how long when do you want your request and all the approval cycle to be archived, and if you want it to be purged as well. Okay, so you can specify that. It's fully generic, it's fully integrated, and important, it's free. I don't get any penny from this. So I don't know if you have any question. Otherwise, you can always ping me here, you see. And well, I hope that you enjoyed this session. And thank you very much. And thank you for having me.